After spending more than 20 years on Missouri's death row, Johnny Johnson was executed by lethal injection. But to understand how a 24-year-old ended up there, we have to go back to a summer morning in 2003 when a little girl vanished. It was July 26, 2003, just after 6 a.m. when 6-year-old Cassandra Casey Lynn Williamson climbed out of bed and went downstairs in her pajamas. She had done it before, turning on the TV and settling in to watch cartoons while the rest of the house was still asleep. So that morning felt no different. Her father, Ernie Williamson, had gotten up early for his shift at the cement factory and stepped into the bathroom for only a minute. But when he came back, Casey was gone. At the time, Ernie and Angie, Casey's mom, were separated, but Ernie stayed close. He lived just across the street with his dad, so he wouldn't miss time with the kids, and that weekend he had even spent the night at the house. The family had hosted a barbecue the night before, and Ernie had decided to sleep there. It should have been safe. But Ernie wasn't the only one who stayed over. Johnny Johnson, who was just 24 at the time, had slept on the couch. He was a longtime family friend, someone Casey knew and trusted. So when he told her that morning he knew a fun place to play, she didn't think twice. He said there were games, that it would be just the two of them. And to Casey, it sounded like an adventure. So she followed him out the door. They walked together until they reached the edge of town, where the skeleton of the old glass factory still stood, abandoned, crumbling, and forgotten. That's where everything changed. The promise of fun turned into something much darker. Johnny backed her into a corner. At first, he exposed himself. Then he told her to take off her pajamas. And when she rejected him, when she tried to push past him, he snapped. Casey fought back, but she was just a child, and he was a grown man with strong hands. He grabbed a brick and slammed it into her head. Once, then again, over and over, the blows kept coming until she dropped. She tried to crawl away, dazed and hurt, but he followed, hitting her again until her small body gave out. Her skull had started to fracture, but somehow she was still breathing. So he picked up a large boulder, something heavy enough to finish what he started, and dropped it on her head. Only then did she stop moving. Afterward, Johnny tried to cover his tracks. He dragged her body to a fire pit nearby and covered her with some scattered debris, dirt, leaves, anything he could find. Then he made his way to the Merrimack River, where he stripped off his clothes and washed the blood from his skin, scrubbing himself clean, like water could somehow erase the truth. But it couldn't. Back at the house, the panic had already set in. Casey was gone, and no one knew where she could be. The adults shouted her name and searched in every room, checking under beds, behind doors in closets, anywhere a child might hide. When they still couldn't find her, they stepped outside and searched the yard and the street. But she wasn't there either. That's when they called the police, and within an hour, the search was on. Local officers, deputies, and even the FBI joined in. So did neighbors, volunteers, and strangers from down the road. Everyone hoped Casey had just wandered off, that she was hiding somewhere nearby, that this would all turn out to be nothing. But then someone stepped forward, and everything changed. A witness had seen something disturbing, a man carrying a little girl. And that man turned out to be Johnny Johnson. He wasn't a stranger. Casey's mother, Angie, had grown up with his sister. She had even babysat him when he was just a little boy. And now he was the main suspect. The more the police learned, the worse it looked. Johnny had just been released from a psychiatric facility 6 months earlier after being committed for schizophrenia. And now they discovered that he had stayed the night at the same house. And by the time Casey went missing, he was gone too. But Johnny didn't stay hidden for long, and when they brought him in, the truth began to surface. At first, Johnny sat quietly in the interrogation room, fidgeting in his seat and denying everything. But the pressure built, and eventually he broke. He told detectives what happened that morning and where they could find her. Less than a mile from her home, buried in a shallow pit behind an abandoned glass factory, a volunteer spotted something. It was Casey. Her body had been left like trash, partially buried with sticks and broken brush, just like Johnny had said. But the question that followed was even harder to answer. Why? Why would anyone do something like this? Investigators started digging into his past, and what they found was disturbing. Johnny's life had unraveled before it ever had the chance to take shape. Born to a young mother already overwhelmed with her older 2 kids, he slipped through the cracks. The pregnancy was rough, and Johnny came into the world with deficiencies. There wasn't much love, and even less stability, and what little attention he got often turned violent. His mother's boyfriend nearly drowned him once, but not as a scare tactic. He held Johnny underwater until he almost stopped breathing, and that kind of trauma stuck. At school, he struggled too. He couldn't keep up with the lessons, didn't fit in with the other kids, and the bedwetting never stopped, not in grade school and not in middle school. By his teens, the shame was constant, and drugs and alcohol became an escape. But the violence didn't end. It just changed direction, sometimes from others, sometimes from himself. By 18, Johnny knew something was wrong. In 1996, he walked himself into a psychiatric facility, afraid of what he was hearing. And who? He said he blacked out and heard voices, some from dead friends, urging him to take his own life. But despite all the treatment he got, the voices didn't stop. They only grew louder. By 1997, they were still there, whispering the same deadly commands. Doctors wrote they were command in nature, telling him to hurt himself or someone else. By September that year, one phrase showed up in his chart: paranoid psychosis, and in 2001, a psychiatrist detailed his symptoms. Johnny described hearing both male and female voices, sometimes kind, but most times cruel. They seemed to float in from outside his head, and he only found relief when music was playing. He also believed people could read his thoughts, and that someone was always trying to hurt him. The doctor said his delusions were real symptoms, not just stories. His diagnosis was clear: paranoid psychosis. But the voices didn't let go. By February 2003, he was hearing the words, "kill, kill, kill," and just 6 months later, he listened. After his arrest, prosecutors wasted no time. Johnny was charged with kidnapping, attempted and the murder of 6-year-old Casey Williamson. And under Missouri law, the stakes couldn't have been higher. A conviction for first-degree murder meant life without parole, or death. It took 2 more years before he finally stood trial in a St. Louis County courtroom. And when he did, there was no claim of innocence, no effort to deny what had happened. Everyone in that room knew who killed Casey. But his defense team tried to steer the story in a different direction. They said Johnny wasn't in his right mind that morning. He suffered from schizoaffective disorder, they argued, and the murder wasn't planned. It was the result of a complete psychotic break. He wasn't thinking clearly, he was hallucinating. A psychiatrist backed that claim on the stand. And so did Johnny's girlfriend, who told the jury how he had stopped taking his meds and had grown paranoid and unpredictable in the days leading up to the murder. But prosecutors pushed back, hard. Yes, Johnny had a history of mental illness, they said, but that didn't excuse what he did. He knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't confusion, it was a decision. And if he had been hallucinating, the state argued, drugs were more likely the cause than any mental breakdown. They painted him not as delusional, but dangerous, not broken, but cruel. He was responsible, and he had planned it. On January 18, 2005, the jury made its decision. They found him guilty of murder, and less than 2 months later, on March 7th, the court sentenced him to death. But that wasn't all. He also received 3 additional life sentences for kidnapping, for attempted rape, and for armed criminal action. Those sentences would run consecutively, one after the other, not at the same time. He wasn't getting out, ever. But prison didn't quiet the chaos inside him. Not for long. In late 2003, while still awaiting trial, Johnny had started seeing things. He told the staff about them. Shadows, he called them. Not people exactly, but things that moved along the walls and slipped through cracks when no one was looking. He said they watched him, shifting in the corners of his cell. And by 2004, whatever grip he still had on reality was shattered. He told mental health staff he wasn't from here. "I am not from this dimension," he said. "My soul is from a different world." He described nightmares, burning skies, corpses clawing through fire, demons speaking in tongues. And one of them had a name, Leviathan. It whispered to him in the dark, and Johnny listened. That same year, something inside him snapped. He slammed his head into the steel door of his cell until he bled. Then he used that blood like ink, smearing a single sentence across the wall: "I'm the dead." During that time, the voices also told him to cut off his own arm. He smeared feces on windows, carved into his own skin, and filled the walls with words like, "Die and we're dead." Even after years of meds and treatment, nothing held him steady, and by 2021, the delusion had changed again. "I'm not suicidal," he told the staff. "I'm a vampire." He claimed he could bend his bones, flex his eyes, and hear every voice in the prison all at once. His speech broke apart in fragments and tangents, and the fantasy wouldn't let him go. And underneath it all, one idea never let go. He believed the world was tied to his life. He told psychologists more than once, "When I was born, the world was created. And when I die, the world will die." Some voices called him God, while others warned the end was coming. For more than 2 decades, the hallucinations stayed with him. They followed him through cell transfers and psych evaluations and years without rest. And no matter how many times they medicated him, one thing never changed. Those voices were real to him, and they never left. But this all didn't stop Johnny from trying to fight his sentence. He appealed twice to the Missouri Supreme Court, and when that failed, he turned to the federal courts. But every single appeal was denied. And as the execution date crept closer, his lawyers shifted focus. They argued he wasn't fit for execution, that mental illness had stripped him of the ability to understand what was happening. They brought in a board-certified neuropsychiatrist, a specialist in forensic psychiatry, who sat down with Johnny and came away shaken. The doctor didn't just say Johnny was mentally ill, he said Johnny couldn't comprehend why the state wanted to execute him. Not really. In his mind, this wasn't about punishment or justice for Casey's murder. It was something cosmic. He believed Satan was behind everything, and that his own death would trigger the end of the world. But even with that expert opinion, no court stepped in. On August 1st, 2023, every legal door was shut. The Missouri governor denied clemency, and the courts refused to grant another delay. His time had run out. In the days leading up to Johnny's execution, Casey's mother spoke publicly again, carrying grief that hadn't dulled with time. She had moved on in some ways. She divorced Casey's father and found love again, but the pain never left. It had become visible in every corner of their family. She spoke about Casey's older sister, who was just 12 when Casey was murdered. She spiraled afterward, numbing the pain with drugs and alcohol until it finally caught up with her. In 2015, she died of an overdose. And the 2 youngest kids, only 2 and 4, when their sister was killed, grew up battling mental illness and trust issues that followed them into adulthood. Even their grandfather, once the steady one, drank himself to death in the years that followed. Casey's mom didn't talk about forgiveness. She wanted the execution, not for revenge, but for closure. "I'll never put Casey to rest," she said, "but I need to put this part of it to rest." But not everyone in the family agreed. Casey's father, Ernie, was quoted in a clemency filing as opposing the execution. But when a reporter asked him directly, he was blunt. "I never said I didn't want Johnny to die," he said. "I would love to see him die a miserable death." His issue wasn't mercy, it was justice. Ernie didn't believe in the death penalty because, in his view, it let killers off too easy. He had done time himself inside Potosi Correctional Center, the same prison where Johnny waited to die. Ernie had seen what it did to men. To him, death was an escape. Living inside that place day after day, that was the real punishment. On August 1st, 2023, Johnny ordered a bacon cheeseburger, curly fries, and a strawberry milkshake as his last meal. He left behind a short handwritten note. "God bless. Sorry to the people and family I hurt." As he lay flat on the gurney, the white sheet pulled tight up to his neck, Johnny slowly turned his head to the left. His eyes were closed, but for a few quiet seconds, it looked like he was listening, maybe to his spiritual advisor's final words. Then he turned forward again, resting his head back against the pillow. His face stayed still, his breathing unchanged. And when the injection started, he didn't move. At precisely 6:33 p.m., he was pronounced dead. Johnny Johnson was 45 years old. What do you think? Has justice been served? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.